Kavi Kailash was not a general. He was not a military commander, not a fort keeper, not a cavalry officer. He was a poet, a Sanskrit scholar, a man of extraordinary intellectual depth who had found his way into Sambhaji's inner circle through the one thing that the warrior king valued almost as much as military excellence: the life of the mind. Their relationship began when Sambhaji was still a young man, before the throne, before the wars, before the full weight of the Maratha kingdom had settled onto his shoulders. Kavi Kailash recognized in the young prince something that the court politicians around him had consistently failed to see: not a liability, not a risk to be managed, a mind of genuine brilliance that needed the right kind of company to fully develop. And Sambhaji, for his part, found in Kavi Kailash something equally rare: a man who spoke to him honestly, who didn't filter everything through political calculation, who engaged with his ideas seriously, pushed back when he disagreed, and never treated the conversation as an opportunity to advance his own agenda. In a court full of people who wanted something from the king, Kavi Kailash simply wanted a conversation. That kind of friendship, genuine, unconditional, intellectually equal, is extraordinarily rare for any person. For a king, it is almost unheard of. It is also, as history would prove, extraordinarily dangerous. But do not mistake Kavi Kailash for a man who only existed in libraries and scholarly discussions. His presence in Sambhaji's life extended far beyond the intellectual. He was there on campaigns, present in war councils, traveling with Sambhaji through the most dangerous years of the Mughal conflict, a civilian in a military world, and yet completely integrated into it because of the absolute trust Sambhaji placed in him. That trust was not blind. Sambhaji had grown up in a court where trust was the most dangerous thing a king could extend carelessly. He had seen what happened when loyalty was assumed rather than earned. He had watched his father's advisors betray him through careful manipulation. He had lived through a succession crisis engineered by people his father had trusted. Kavi Kailash had earned his place in a way that no political calculation could explain. He had simply been there, consistently, honestly, completely, through everything. And in the field, that presence mattered in ways that went beyond companionship. Kavi Kailash served as a sounding board for strategic decisions, a voice that could tell Sambhaji what his generals sometimes couldn't: that a plan was reckless, that a risk wasn't worth taking, that the emotional response and the strategic response were pointing in different directions. Every great military leader needs someone who can say that. Very few of them have it. While the land campaigns against Aurangzeb dominated the story of Sambhaji's reign, there was another dimension to his military genius that history consistently undervalues: the sea. Shivaji had understood the strategic importance of the Konkan coastline and had begun building a Maratha naval force, something genuinely unprecedented for a land-based Deccan kingdom. Sambhaji inherited that navy and expanded it into something far more formidable. The Arabian Sea along the Konkan coast was not empty water. It was a strategic highway for trade, for troop movements, for supply lines, for projection of power along a coastline that stretched for hundreds of miles. Whoever controlled those waters controlled the economic lifeblood of the entire Western Deccan. The Portuguese understood this. The cities of Janjira, a powerful naval force operating in the region with Mughal support, understood this. And Sambhaji understood this better than either of them. His naval campaigns were conducted with the same aggressive strategic thinking that characterizes land operations. He didn't wait for naval threats to come to him. He projected force outward, challenging Portuguese positions along the coast, engaging the cities directly, maintaining Maratha presence on waters that his enemies would prefer control unchallenged. The Maratha navy under Sambhaji was never the largest force on those waters, but it was fast, aggressive, and commanded by officers who had inherited Shivaji's understanding that in naval warfare, initiative matters more than numbers. The dominant narrative of Sambhaji's reign tends to focus on the defensive struggle against Aurangzeb, the heroic resistance of a smaller kingdom against an overwhelming empire. And that narrative is true, but it is incomplete. Because Sambhaji didn't just defend, he attacked, repeatedly, successfully. The raid on Burhanpur in 1681 was one of the most audacious military operations of the entire Mughal-Maratha conflict. Burhanpur was a major Mughal city, wealthy, strategically important, and supposedly well protected. Sambhaji's forces struck it with a kind of speed and precision that recalled his father's most famous raids, carrying off enormous quantities of wealth and supplies that directly funded continued Maratha resistance. The message was unmistakable. This was not a kingdom fighting for survival, with its back against the wall. This was a kingdom that could reach deep into Mughal territory and hit whatever it chose to hit. Then there was Ramsaj Fort, a story that deserves far more attention than it typically receives. Aurangzeb's forces began their siege of Ramsaj in 1682. They had overwhelming numerical superiority. They had siege equipment. They had the resources of the largest empire in the subcontinent. Ramsaj held for 6 years. 6 years of continuous Mughal siege, and the fort never fell. The garrison inside, massively outnumbered and cut off from easy resupply, held their position through a combination of the fort's natural defenses, tactical brilliance, and the kind of morale that only exists when soldiers genuinely believe in what they're defending. Aurangzeb threw resources at Ramsaj that could have funded entire separate military campaigns, and got nothing. These victories, Burhanpur, Ramsaj, the naval campaigns, dozens of smaller engagements, were not accidents. They were the product of a military system that Sambhaji had built and personally led, a system that had taken everything his father taught him and added his own dimension of aggressive, forward-thinking strategic vision. If you're finding this story as incredible as I do, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. This series is just getting started. Behind all of this, the campaigns, the victories, the naval operations, the endless war with Aurangzeb, Sambhaji was also trying to be a father. His son Shah had been born in 1682, a boy growing up inside a kingdom at permanent war, with a father who was almost always on campaign, surrounded by the constant tension of a court that knew the Mughal threat was never more than a season away. Sambhaji's relationship with Shahu has not been documented in the same detail as his relationship with Kavi Kailash, or even his military campaigns. But what survives suggests a father acutely aware of the parallels between his son's childhood and his own, growing up in a warrior kingdom, in the shadow of a legendary parent, without the luxury of a normal childhood. He wanted something different for Shahu. Whether he believed he could actually provide it, given the reality of the war, is another question entirely. And Yesabai was there through all of it, steady, loyal, present in ways that the historical record consistently undervalues. The partner of a man who was simultaneously a scholar, a warrior, a king, and a father trying to hold together a kingdom that the most powerful emperor in the world was determined to destroy. These were the people Sambhaji was fighting for, not just the abstract idea of the Maratha kingdom, these specific, irreplaceable human beings. By 1688, the strategic situation had shifted in ways that even Sambhaji's military brilliance was struggling to compensate for. Bijapur was gone. Golconda was gone. The buffer kingdoms that had previously absorbed part of Aurangzeb's attention and military resources had been eliminated. The full weight of the Mughal war machine, still enormous despite years of expensive Deccan campaigning, was now focused on one target. The Maratha treasury was under strain. Key commanders were showing the exhaustion of years of continuous warfare. And Aurangzeb, old, relentless, absolutely convinced of the divine righteousness of his mission, had changed his strategy. He was no longer trying to defeat the Maratha army in the field. He was looking for something more targeted, more surgical. He was looking for Sambhaji himself. The intelligence network that Aurangzeb had been building for years across the Deccan was producing results. Informants, defectors, people with grievances against Sambhaji's court who were willing to trade information for Mughal gold or Mughal protection. The net was tightening. And Sambhaji, still campaigning, still fighting, still refusing to accept a defensive posture that might have kept him safer, was moving through a landscape that was becoming increasingly dangerous in ways he couldn't fully see. Kavi Kailash was with him, as always, and somewhere in the hills of the Konkan, a Mughal commander named Mukhara Khan was receiving very specific, very accurate information about exactly where the Maratha king would be. And when the brotherhood that had sustained Sambhaji through everything, through the wars, the victories, the losses, the impossible weight of a kingdom fighting for its survival was about to be tested in a way neither man could have prepared for. In the next episode, the net closes, the last stand before the trap, and the moment that changed everything. If this episode hit different, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Every single one of those likes tells me to keep going with this series. I'll see you in the next one. History remembers kings through their battles, through their victories and defeats, through the empires they built or the ones they failed to stop. But behind every great king, if you look closely enough, there is always a person. Someone who knew him not as a symbol, not as a throne, not as a title. Someone who knew him as a man. For Sambhaji Maharaj, that person was Kavi Kailash. And their story, the story of a warrior king and his closest companion, is one of the most extraordinary relationships in all of Maratha history. It is also the key to understanding everything that came after.